Good afternoon. It is our pleasure to welcome Governor Andrew Cuomo back to Albany. This is his first time with us since this past election day, so please join me in a warm Albany congratulations on his re-election by a resounding 23-point margin, and he got more votes than any governor in the history of the state of New York. With this victory, he joins a group of esteemed three-term New York State governors, which include his father, Mario Cuomo, Al Smith, Tom Dewey, and Nelson Rockefeller, to name just a few. And we will need a tested veteran skill in the months ahead. It is budget season in Albany, and we're always happy to hear from the governor about his priorities for the negotiations ahead. So much of our city's economic well-being depends upon our state government, and we are fortunate to have a governor who understands the need to invest in infrastructure today to assure our future tomorrow. He has mobilized the Port Authority, dispatched them to our airports, to LaGuardia and JFK, which are witnessing long overdue transformations, with an $8 billion commitment to LaGuardia and a $13 billion commitment to JFK's Terminal 1. That's serious money, but that's not all. Just yesterday, he announced new plans for the renovation and expansion of JFK's Terminal 8, terminal I personally spend a lot of time in, with a $344 million private investment commitment from American Airlines and British Airways. Governor Cuomo is also working hard to reform the MTA and pushing for congestion pricing to create a new, desperately needed revenue stream to improve our transit system. I also want to recognize the governor's leadership in protecting women's rights. New York was not very popular in this week's State of the Union, but no matter who pushes our governor, he is resolute in advancing laws that safeguards women's rights, most recently with the passage of the Reproductive Health Care Act, and we want to say thank you. Before I turn the stage over to the governor, I'd like to recognize and welcome some of the elected officials and public servants who are here with us today. There are many, so I'd ask that you please hold your applause till the end. From the New York State Senate, Leroy Comrie, Brad Hoylman, and Luis Sepulveda. New York State Assembly members Robert Carroll, Natalia Fernandez, Judy Griffin, Amy Paulin, Robert Rodriguez, Rebecca Seawright, Joanne Simon, Al Taylor, and David Weprin. From the New York City Council, Matthew Eugene and Udonis Rodriguez. Our friends from Labor, including Randy Weingarten. And senior members of the governor's administration, including Melissa DeRosa, Alfonso David, Robert Mojica, Kelly Cummings, Adam Zarofsky, Dana having my Billy moment. Thank you. Howard Zemsky and Ruth Ann Visnaskis. From the Port Authority, Rick Cotton, and from the NMTA, Jano Lieber. Please join me in thanking all of them for their service. These are complicated times for New York. Our federal government is cutting back on protecting the environment, aiding the poor, embracing immigrants, and guaranteeing basic rights for workers. These facts make our leadership in New York State more important than ever. Recent changes, such as the loss of state and local tax deductibility, have inflicted a painful 1-2 punch on our state. It increased the overall federal tax bill for many New Yorkers, and it's driven down our projected state revenue by making New York a higher tax, less competitive place to live. Policy that is literally driving people from New York. Outside forces are trying to re-engineer our state. At Albany, I should say, we believe the coming census will be front and center in this battle in the next year and a half. We need a governor visionary enough to solve problems when needed and tough enough to stand up to Washington when necessary. We need it, and we're lucky enough to have it. We're proud to have him back. Please welcome Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please sit. Your cold meal will get colder. First to Stephen Rubenstein, who's done such a great job with Abney. He obviously follows in an esteemed legacy and has big shoes to fill. I know a little bit about what that's like. But Stephen Rubenstein is doing a fantastic job. Let's give him a big round of applause. I'd like to welcome everyone today, especially my colleagues in the state legislature, in the Assembly and the Senate. If they look a little tired, they should be. They've had a phenomenally productive few weeks. I don't think we've started a legislative session with more progress in a shorter period of time. The Reproductive Health Act, the Contraceptive Care Act, gun laws, the DREAM Act, we really have made great, great progress. So let's give them a big round of applause for all they've done. And to my team and concerned New Yorkers, let me begin where Stephen left off. This is a very difficult time for this state. I've been in the state government, I've been in local government, I've been in the federal government for more years than I care to remember. But I've never seen the confluence of events that we're dealing with now. It truly is a pivotal moment. You have a federal government that is in disarray. The economy is shifting. Financial markets are volatile. The federal tax reform and the SALT provision targets New York specifically, and it is a major threat. I fear that SALT is already causing people to leave our state. We just saw revenues drop $2.3 billion from projected revenues. And I'm afraid what you're starting to see is people actually leaving and finding a different locale because the tax structure has gotten too high in New York. You have political turmoil. You have political extremism on both sides of the aisle. And you have quality of life issues in New York City, which are aggravating this already complex situation. What we do in New York this year matters. And it's time for New York-style candor, frankness, and openness about what we're dealing with. The good news is over the past few years, we built a stronger economy than the state has ever seen before. Taxes are at an all-time low. Every New Yorker pays a lower tax rate today than the day I was elected, period. We have more jobs, private sector jobs in the state of New York than New York State has ever had before, over 8.2 million jobs. Unemployment is at an all-time low 3.9%. We're diversifying our economy. So while we're Wall Street and we're finance and we're real estate, we're also the arts center, the film hub, the tourist center, and the nation's second largest tech center and growing. Amazon coming to Queens with 25,000 great jobs is a major economic plus for this state, the largest economic development program in the history of the state of New York. That's what Amazon is. And just yesterday, as Stephen mentioned, the Port Authority announced a new JFK, American Airlines, and British Airlines terminal, $344 million. So the JFK renovation is starting also. Let's give Rick Cotton a round of applause for that good work. But at this demanding time, with this anxious public, it's not about what we did yesterday that matters. It's today that counts. And a critical issue that we must deal with is our mass transit system and our traffic congestion. Navigating New York is becoming unbearable. Our regional population has grown from 19 million, expected to reach 21 million in 2020. The failing train system has driven more commuters to cars, which has in turn generated more traffic. You now have car services, Uber, Lyft, green cars, yellow cars, black cars, which have created multicolored gridlock in New York. Buses don't move, cabs don't move. If we are to continue to grow, we must be able to move. We must have a functional regional transit system. There is no metropolitan area in this country that is thriving without a successful regional transit system. Our 600-mile subway system, first built in 1904, was a gift from our forebearers and a platform for our future growth. Just think of the vision they had, 1904, to build 600 miles underground. What have we done? Well, now the MTA is the great transit abyss, taking us backwards. The MTA, everyone hates it, but yet nobody knows what it actually is. It was a governmental Frankenstein created in the 60s. Governor Rockefeller, who was a powerful, domineering leader who rarely backed away from a challenge, actually backed away from the responsibility for making the trains run on time and being identified with the responsibility of fare or toll increases. It was created as a political structure. He created the MTA as a holding company for four major corporations: the Long Island Railroad, Metro-North, New York City Transit Authority, and the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. The four entities were left totally intact, and a 23-member board was placed on top of the four existing entities. The voting members are then appointed by 9 different elected officials. They're appointed to term appointments, so some members that are on the board were actually appointed by prior office holders. The 23 members represent different parties, regions, constituencies, and provide the full spectrum of political and governmental intrigue. It could be a great mini-series. There are factions and there are sub-factions. A more functional board would be President Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Rush Limbaugh, and Nancy Pelosi. Even if the board somehow gets through all the internal politics and cobbles together a resolution, once the board takes any capital action, it has another Byzantine challenge. The board's capital actions can be unilaterally vetoed by the governor, the mayor, the speaker of the assembly, or the Senate leader. There's no standard for the veto. It can be purely discretionary, and there is no appeal, and there is no override. It is a structure that was designed to fail. And that's where we are today. That board and veto structure are then compounded by an organizational dysfunction. Each subdivision is a freestanding corporation with its own bureaucracy, its own culture, its own personality. 32 unions represent the MTA employees. How would you like to negotiate those contracts? 11 police departments with concurrent jurisdiction. So the board actually exercises very little real oversight and essentially has become a mechanism for providing political cover for the never-ending cost increases that the bureaucracy incurs as it grows. The MTA's performance is simply indefensible. The East Side Access Project, for example, a vital project. It was started in the 1960s. It's still ongoing today. East Side Access was supposed to be finished in 1975. Now it's supposed to be finished in 2022. At this rate, my grandchildren will cut the ribbon on East Side Access. The cost was first established to be $75 million, then $300, then $3.3 billion, then $4.3 billion, then $5.3 billion, then $6.3 billion, then $7.2 billion, then $8.2 billion, then $10, and now $11.1 billion. That is just not acceptable. It is not acceptable for such a vital function. And it's not acceptable when we're supposed to go to the people of this state and say, we want more money to support this organization. So what do? First, we don't do what we've done for the past 50 years. What have we done for the past 50 years? What the political thing to do is put a bandage over it, a superficial reform plan. We've done that 167 times. 167 reform plans. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. We can't do that again. We need real change. Real change comes from following the golden rule. That's what I tell my new commissioners who come in and have to take over a dysfunctional bureaucracy. I say the Vince Lombardi School of Government. Get back to basics. Get back to fundamentals. For any organization, it's about M&M. No, not the candy. It's about management and money. Management means someone has to be in charge. There must be a name and a face who can be held accountable, and it must be an elected official. All of you who run a business know there is no organization that works without accountability. There is no organization that works unless somebody is in charge and somebody is responsible. Bureaucracies do not manage themselves. They grow and they fester. And the path of least resistance becomes the path most often taken. Like the Board of Education in New York City, which was another nameless, faceless bureaucracy that was replaced with mayoral control because someone has to sign on the dotted line. And that was exactly the right thing to do. So what do we do about the MTA? Someone has to be in charge. Nobody is in charge now. It's all about finger pointing. We have several options. Option number one, we bring in the Terminator. He is up for the job. He can handle war. He's not afraid of rats. He would be perfect for the job. Option two, the main subdivision of the MTA is the New York City Transit Authority. New York City Transit Authority is owned by New York City. It is leased to the MTA on an annual basis. If New York City does not renew the lease, New York City takes back control of the New York City transit system. It's that simple. So, New York City owns the subway system, they lease it to the MTA, cancel the lease, give it back to New York City, let them run it. It would be a major financial obligation for the city to fund the subway system, but it would be clear accountability and responsibility. Next option, Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Heastie. He has a unilateral veto of the capital plan. He can take control and responsibility, and he can run it. Option four, Senate Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who also has a unilateral veto of the capital plan. She could take it, and she could be responsible. Option five, the governor could take responsibility. You notice I'm the only one in those pictures who's not smiling at the prospect. That's because I have more facts on the matter. Any option would provide management clarity and would be an improvement. Any option that says this person is in charge. But for any competent and capable person of actually assuming this daunting responsibility, they would demand authority. Not some control or almost control or the most control, but control. Control is a binary concept. Basic authority to make decisions, to hire and fire, to reorganize. No manager can be asked to manage an organization if they don't control it. I'm not going to represent to the people of this state that I will try to fix the MTA without the authority to do it. I've taken on many big projects. I've never shied away from a challenge, and I'm proud of it. But if I fail, it has to be because I failed, not because I didn't have the authority to do the job. And any manager who would be willing to take the job without the authority is not a manager who's actually qualified to do the job in the first place. There is much to do at the MTA. The bureaucracy will not reform itself. It has to come from an external source. You have to start with each MTA subdivision, which has its own back office operations, its own personnel, advertising, engineering, legal, accounting. It's a tremendous waste. It's highly ineffective. The MTA employs 75,000 people. Average compensation, $140,000. 155 employees make over $250,000. No one on state service comes near those numbers for the entire state government. The subdivisions all share facilities, riders, and tracks, and they must all be coordinated. I also believe the MTA is captive of what I call the transportation industrial complex. The same consultants and incestuous relationships offer the same products, the same means, the same methods. The new signal system being planned for the MTA is called CBTC, Communication-Based Train Control. It is 1980 technology. The plan calls for installation in 7 to 10 years. That really means 14 to 20 years in real time if we're lucky. However, technology changes daily, if not more frequently. Ultra-wideband is the state of the art today. And that's what we should be looking at in the MTA. But the bureaucracy has no incentive to innovate. And without innovation, there is no real progress. The L train reconstruction is a perfect example. A 15-month shutdown was planned for what they call the Canarsie Tunnel, which is where the L train runs. They spent years and millions of dollars planning alternative transit routes for people, 200,000 people who would be affected by the L train. Why were they doing the construction they were doing? Because they were replicating the existing design of the tunnel, which was built in 1924. And they were rebuilding it as it was in 1924. But think about it. Who replicates a design from 1924? The bureaucracy will say, well, that's how we've always done it. And we're replacing what we've done. But that's not the way a real organization would work. We brought in Columbia University, Cornell University. They brought in the best minds internationally. They looked at the project. They redesigned the project. They came up with new technology. The result is no total shutdown whatsoever. No displacement of the 200,000 people, no alternative traffic routes, and the net cost of the project will even be less. Construction projects never come in time. They don't use design build, which we know reduces bureaucracy and shifts the responsibility to the private sector. It is inarguably the most efficient construction method. On the state side, we will not do a major project that does not use design build. Fare evasion in the subway system is exploding. I understand the politics of the situation, the problem of arresting a person for a $2.75 fare, a person who's often young, often minority, and then would have a criminal record. The Manhattan DA doesn't want to prosecute the crimes. So the police enforcement has dramatically decreased. And fare evasion has dramatically increased. It is almost doubled from 110 million loss in 2015 to $215 million last year. How much is $215 million? It's the same amount of money the MTA currently wants to raise fares to cover the operating deficit. You can't have a voluntary payment system. And that's what we are developing. You watch at a subway station and you see people, if there's a line at the turnstile, they just walk right through the doors. It can't be. The MTA gave us an estimate for their 5-year capital plan. The range of the estimate goes from 40 billion to 80 billion. That's not a range. That is a guess, 40 to 80. But my favorite MTA decision, because you have to laugh, otherwise you cry, is the one they made to pick a product to clean the subway stations. What product did they pick? Tide. Yes, the same Tide detergent you use at home to wash your clothes. If it's got to be clean, it's got to be Tide. That Tide. Good on hard-to-get-out grass stains, I'm sure. Why did they choose Tide? Because it smells nice. I understand that it smells nice. And I like that it smells nice. But I also understand the problem is that the subway stations stink. And that's the problem. In short, the MTA needs a fundamental management overhaul. The 60s product of the MTA was designed to avoid responsibility and accountability. We have to do the exact opposite. No more finger pointing. We need a dramatic increase in performance and innovation. We need a professional functioning agency, and we need progress, and we need it quickly. The second half of the equation is the second M in the M&M. And it's still not the candy. It's the money, meaning you have to have a reliable funding stream so annual budgeting is not up to political whim, but it's based on economics and it's based on planning and it's not politicized. There are a number of options being put forth to find the funding. We're discussing it in Albany. Option one, President Trump should pay. That's my position. That's my option. He has a lot of money. He's nasty to New York. He should pay. On the off chance that he won't pay, we go to option two. Option two is the rich people should pay more. It's not enough that we have the second highest millionaires tax in the country, and the federal law just ended the state and local tax deductibility SALT, because ignorance is bliss. For some, what's SALT? I thought it's something that went on a hamburger. SALT can decimate our economy. For middle-class families and above, it raises taxes 30%. That's the $2 billion shortfall that I mentioned that we're feeling already. And similar states that are affected by SALT are also seeing tremendous drops in their revenue. New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, all states that are paying this SALT penalty. And raise taxes on the rich, raise taxes on the rich. We have a very fragile tax structure. The top 1% of taxpayers pay half of the taxes. Think about that for a moment. Top 1%. Less than 100,000 people pay half the taxes. They leave, we have a big problem very quickly. And Florida residency and 183 days is more and more attractive. Snowbirds are now permanently moving their nests down south. If we raise taxes on millionaires, the only millionaire left is going to be Steven Rubenstein. And Steven will only stay until his term as Abney chair expires. Option three is raise fares on riders about 30%, which would cover both the operating deficits and capital costs. What's the rationale for this option? Because the riders will blame the MTA, and nobody knows who the MTA is anyway. And because riders, frankly, can't be any angrier than they are now, so there's no cost. Option four is the city should pay. Why? Well, the city actually owns the subway system, and by law, they are supposed to pay the capital for the subway system. The city has always paid the lion's share of the New York City capital system. Over the past 30 years, New York City paid about 60% of the capital cost, and New York State paid about 40%. But New York City says they don't want to pay. To me, it's the corollary to the voluntary fare system. You pay if you want to pay. What the law says is irrelevant. The last capital plan, the state paid 3 times what the city has paid. So it's time that the city needs to carry its fair share also. Option 5 is the state should pay, because who cares what the law says anyway about who should pay, and never mind what Long Island and Westchester and Buffalo and Syracuse and Rochester think, and never mind that the state has a deficit. We should just turn on the printing press and create the money. Option 6 is use the marijuana tax, which is a great idea, but it's 3 years away. The California statewide marijuana tax is $100 million. We estimate the New York City marijuana tax at $120 million, but we need $1 billion per year to fund the capital. Option 7 is pass a toll on only out-of-state drivers. Chris Christie won't like it, but he's not governor anymore anyway, so the only problem with that option is the U.S. Constitution Interstate Commerce Clause. We could pass a commuter tax on Long Island, Westchester, Hudson Valley commuters. We did that once before. It was political suicide. It was repealed. New York City secession is probably a more likely scenario. And option 9 is congestion pricing, which is the best and logical and realistic option. Congestion pricing would charge a toll for those entering the Manhattan Central Business District south of 60th Street. It would stop what they call bridge shopping. Right now, some bridges are free, some bridges have a toll. So you can decide between the 59th Street Bridge and the Queens Midtown Tunnel, between the Brooklyn Bridge and between the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. It would reduce congestion, it would reduce pollution. The fixed New York City panel came up with a number of variable rates that would incentivize drivers towards non-congestion hours by reducing tolls at certain times. We've experimented with this in the past. We know trucks can come in during the night, and certain deliveries can be made if you incentivize it. Cameras would be installed on existing traffic devices, and they'd become part of the Easy Pass system, which is already operational at the tunnels and the bridges, so it would coordinate the tolls. In other words, if you paid a toll coming in through the Queens Midtown Tunnel, you wouldn't be tolled twice when you enter the district. The funds would be put in a lockbox for MTA capital projects, so the public wouldn't have to worry about the money being used for something else. And the fact is, 25% of the commuters who would pay a congestion pricing fee are from out of state. It's Chris Christie who's going to pay. And only a fraction of New Yorkers commute by car into Manhattan. If you look at the percentage of the people from Brooklyn who commute in, it's 1.3%. Queens, 2.2, Bronx, 1.9, Staten Island, 2.3, Westchester, 2.2, Nassau, 1.8, Suffolk, 0.8%. Those are the numbers of people who would actually be affected. But this congestion pricing is still going to be a politically difficult battle. Why? Because politicians do not like to vote for toll increases, myself included, which takes us, interestingly and ironically, full circle back to 1968 when Rockefeller established the MTA because no politician wanted to raise tolls. I understand the politics, but it's also a government responsibility, and there is no smarter, better alternative to do it. The real choice is between congestion pricing or a 30% MTA toll and fare increase. Those are the only real options. Trump is not going to pay, the city's not going to pay, the state doesn't have the money to pay. Either the rider pays in fares and tolls, or it's congestion pricing. That is the real choice. And that's how we have to frame the choice. It's A or B because there is no C. I believe if the public understands the critical choice that the elected officials are making, they will prefer congestion pricing to a fare and a toll increase. But that's a big if. And the if is if we actually inform the public, which is what we all have to set out to do today and what I'm trying to do. However, I don't think, in good faith, and I will not go to the people of this state and ask for a raise in the fares or ask for congestion pricing unless there is a real MTA overhaul plan. Because they are right when they know the MTA is poorly run and is wasting money and is late on projects. And I'm not going to ask the people of the state to give them more money unless I can say simultaneously we are taking care of the management issues, and it's going to stop, and it's going to stop once and for all. No more tinkering, a ground-up overhaul passed by the legislature. And I'm going to propose that to the legislature in this budget modification period. Pass congestion pricing, otherwise there'll be a 30% MTA fare increase. Implement design build for all projects. It's smarter, it's better, it's faster. We must stop the fare evasion explosion, reorganize MTA internally, conduct a forensic audit and determine the true cost of a real capital plan, reorganize the board, put someone in charge, and resolve the unilateral veto, because no organization can work like that. Create a lockbox so people know the congestion pricing money is going only for MTA capital repairs. That will make a dramatic difference at the MTA. It will ruffle feathers. It will disturb the bureaucracy, no doubt, but without disturbing the bureaucracy, you're never going to make any change. Last point is, look, I'm an eternal optimist. You have to be in this job, but I actually believe we can make progress. I know for a fact that we are capable of doing big things and doing them well. I know that because we have done it. We have proven our capacity. Go look at the new Governor Mario M. Cuomo Bridge and tell me we can't take on a big project, get it done on time, on budget, and do something beautiful that was long overdue. Go look at the Javits construction, where we're doubling the size of Javits, and it's on time, and it's on budget, and it's going to be a great vehicle to bring all sorts of shows back to New York. Go look at the new airports in Rochester, and in Elmira, and in Syracuse, and Plattsburgh, and Ithaca, and Albany. All big projects, frightening projects, projects that people said we couldn't get done, and we got them done. We've even gotten them done battling with the bureaucracy. The Port Authority, which is no walk in the park, and LaGuardia Airport. And LaGuardia is going up, and it's on time, and it's on budget, and it is beautiful, and they're rebuilding it while they are operating it. JFK Airport, Moynihan Station, where we had to deal with Amtrak, which is going to change the whole commuting experience, especially for people coming from Long Island. I've even done it with the MTA on isolated items where I had authority. I had authority, frankly, because nobody else wanted it. It was authority by default. But Long Island Railroad, double track and third track are happening. The 2nd Avenue subway extension happened on time. This L train project we focused on, and we got it turned around. And we are what we have built. What made New York, New York, is that we are an engineering marvel. New York is the place where vision meets daring meets skills. Longest bridges, the tallest buildings, the most beautiful public works. That's who we are. We never shy away from a challenge. We don't say, oh, that's too much, that's too disruptive. We run at the challenges. It's that strength Some people say it's the New York arrogance. Yes, it is that attitude that we're a little bit stronger and a little bit smarter and a little bit faster and we're going to get it done. And we have the confidence to get it done. And we have a constructive impatience when it doesn't happen the way it should happen. The MTA is a disgrace for this state. We all know it. It's too vital. We have to do better. Let's be honest. Let's step up. Let's address the issue. Let's take on the politics. Let's challenge ourselves to overcome. We are at a point of crisis. And I'm not going to diminish the issue or camouflage it or sidestep it. It's not who I am. It's not who you elected. It's not why I'm in this job. We must confront it and be honest and resolve it. Because what we can't do is what we've done in the past. We can't punt. For decades, we punted this problem administration after administration after administration. I am not going to be one of those people who punted the problem, which takes us back to the Vince Lombardi School of Government. When we are forced to punt, it is a clear sign of failure. And my friends, failure is not an option. Thank you, and God bless you. Any questions?
All right. Governor has agreed to take a few questions from the audience. Our former chairman, Bill Rudin.
Thank you, Stephen. Governor, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And for your incredible leadership. You mentioned before about the SALT deduction and the impact. This is a two-part question about SALT deduction and the impact on our state budget, which is approximately over $2 billion. Can you discuss that and what you and the Assembly and the state are going to do about the shortfall? And also, last night, President Trump, when asked about SALT and its impact on New York, said that upstate New Yorkers are really not impacted by SALT. They're impacted by the lack of jobs, and they should just leave upstate New York. And do you have a comment about that?
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mr. Former Chairman. Where do you start to refute the President's incorrect factual statements? I hope he got the date right, and I'm sure it was at night. Other than that, everything he said was false. SALT was a direct political attack on this state and other democratic states. What SALT did was it was tucked into the federal tax reform bill. Nobody understood it. It sounded complicated. Stop the deduction of state and local taxes, SALT. It affects primarily, if not exclusively, democratic states and changes the tax structure in this nation, where the red states got a tax cut. The blue states actually got a tax increase. It was an economic civil war, done subtly, done with nuance. But we now have one tax structure, and the red states have a different tax structure. The average New Yorker pays $20,000 in state and local taxes. That means the SALT deduction taxes that differential by the federal tax of about 30%. So it's the first time in history since Lincoln passed the income tax that there is a tax on taxes. So you pay your income tax to New York City, the federal government taxes it. You pay your property tax, the federal government taxes it. It's a tax on tax. It is devastating. And the states with the higher state and local taxes, obviously, it's more devastating. Our revenues are down $2.3 billion, which is a very big number, and we're going to have to scramble now to cover that hole. But I'm afraid, Bill, that it is just the beginning of a trend. And look, we have a migratory pattern to Carolina, to Florida, right? Everybody's grandparents used to talk about, and then I'm going to retire and move to Florida. There was weather issues, climate issues. But now the economic incentive to move out of New York is higher than it has ever been. And SALT put that problem on steroids. Our tax collections are down about 50%. Massachusetts are down about 50%. Jersey's down about 40%. Connecticut is down close to 50%. The non-SALT states, some of them are seeing increases. So it is direct cause and effect. It kills all of New York. Trump talking about upstate New York is like me talking about Antarctica. You know, I have never been there, and I know nothing about it. Upstate New York, jobs are coming back. The unemployment rate that is now at an all-time low in the state of New York, that is all across the state. It's not just New York City. Young people are moving back to Buffalo. Young people are moving back to Rochester. So it's a totally different economic reality than he's talking about. He also said something, you know, he said, President Reagan tried to get this done, state and local taxes, and he failed, but I got it done. You know, it was that Trump machismo. Reagan tried, but he failed, and I got it done. And he had a rationale that Reagan talked to some New Yorkers who talked him out of it. President Reagan listened to reason and logic and sense, and he was not a divider. And when they said to President Reagan, if you do this, you will hurt New York, the Northeast, California, and 20 other states, and how do you have a national recovery when you're devastating New York, the Northeast, and California? President Reagan said, you're right, and he reversed course. President Trump should have half the wisdom on this issue that President Reagan brought.
Hello, Governor. Danielle Perillo from Sterling. I was hoping you could expand about your comments about the L train. Can you provide more details about implementing the plan? And also, how are you going to work with the MTA to execute it?
The L train runs through the Canarsie Tunnel. All of our tunnels are in bad shape. They were in bad shape because they were old. Hurricane Sandy filled the tunnels with water. And once that salt gets into the electrical components, electrical system, it's very problematic. So from the Gateway Tunnel to the East River tunnels to the Canarsie Tunnel, they're all in bad shape. Their plan, the MTA's plan after studying it for many years, was we will replace it as is and just rebuild the whole tunnel. The tunnel was designed in 1924. They were going to rebuild it as it was designed in 1924. It just so happens there have been some improvements since 1924 in design and technology and materials, none of which were taken into consideration because they would say, here's the 1924 tunnel, rebuild the 1924 tunnel. Okay, they were rebuilding a 1924 tunnel. It turns out you could save a lot of time by using different materials. There's something called a bench wall that ran the length of the subway tunnel. You don't have to replace the entire bench wall. You can wrap it with carbon fiber. There are different ways of running cables. The way they used to run power cables was they buried them in cement because that was the only way to protect the cables from fire. So they ran the power cables and built a wall of cement around the power cables. Now they have power cables that are flame resistant because of the coatings. So once you bring that type of technology to bear, it shortened the construction time, it reduced the cost, it eliminated the need for a total shutdown. Now, it was totally disruptive to the MTA because Cornell and Columbia, who, God bless them, they did this pro bono just because they wanted to help, and they had international expertise on how the new tunnels are being built. They put these new ideas on the board. It was highly disruptive because they had been planning this for years. The city was planning alternative bus lanes and painting lines and doing all this stuff. And then it turns out you didn't have to do any of it. So there was tremendous pushback from the bureaucracy, right? Because they were vested in their plan. This is our plan. But at one point, the truth will out, and they presented the design. The designer of the original plan accepted the new Cornell, Columbia ideas, and they've been accepted. They're going ahead with it. There will be no shutdown, and the cost will be reduced. And to me, it was just a wake-up call, because if it's the L train tunnel, and I had the conversations myself, with that mentality, it's everything they're doing. It is everything they're doing. It's every project. We rebuild it the way it was, and that's how we do it. No innovation, no creativity, very incestuous, the same contractors, the same designers, the same result over and over and over. So yes, the L train was a great save because it would have been highly disruptive if 200,000 people had to find a different way to commute. But for me, it just said, this is a systemic, deep, deep problem. Because if they studied this for years, on the board you have the New York City Commissioner of Transportation. Why didn't somebody say, excuse me, is there a different way to do this? Wake up. It is the system.
Thank you, Governor Cuomo. My name is Laura Montross. Stephen Rubenstein mentioned this topic in your introduction, and I just wanted to take a moment to personally thank you for all you have done for women's rights here in New York, specifically codifying Roe v. Wade in the New York State Constitution. My question for you is, what's next? What more can we do to advance the women's agenda in New York State?
Good question. These are all difficult topics today. Is there any good news? Nobody had a good question? Some happy news? Reproductive Health Act, what is happening is the president attacked me in the State of the Union for this, and he has repeatedly, and the Catholic Church has repeatedly. We passed a law in New York that codifies Roe v. Wade, which is the federal decision from 1973, codifying a woman's right to choose for the health or life of the mother. And that's a 1973 Supreme Court decision. It was affirmed several times since then, as recently as 2016, I'm sorry. By various courts, et cetera. And there's a series of cases that run from Roe v. Wade. The president wants to overturn Roe v. Wade. That's what he wants. That's why all the conversation about Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, it all came back to Roe v. Wade, because they want to overturn Roe v. Wade, because they believe that abortion is murder. That's their belief. The Catholic Church agrees that abortion is murder, and they want to overturn Roe v. Wade. I believe they may very well overturn Roe v. Wade, because the president has done a very good job of packing the Supreme Court. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, what happens? Abortion is illegal. How can that possibly be? I had this conversation with my daughters, mid-20s. They know all the answers, they know none of the questions. I said, they overturned Roe v. Wade, abortion is illegal. Oh, that can't be, Dad. I said, no, I'm telling you. I'm the governor. I was the attorney general. I'm telling you. Oh, that can't be. They can't be right. I said, well, where do you think you get the right to have an abortion? You think it's in the Bible, the Old Testament, New Testament? Where? It's just inconceivable to them that you would go back to pre-1973. But that's what would happen. We passed a state law that models itself exactly after the federal law. The same exact protection in Roe v. Wade we codify in the state law, which means even if they overturn Roe v. Wade federally, we now have a state law that gives the same protection. And unless they were willing to have a Supreme Court that said, not only are we going to overturn Roe v. Wade, but we're going to declare any abortion illegal and unconstitutional and trample states' rights, which would be very tough for a conservative to do, we will have protections here in New York State. It has infuriated the president and the Catholic Church because it frustrates their overturning Roe v. Wade federally. Because from their position now they say, well, even if we overturn Roe v. Wade, it will be the law of the land in New York, and then, by the way, other states will probably follow New York. And I hope to goodness that the other states do. That law is signed. It's the question of a woman's right to choose is a highly controversial issue. The Catholic Church is highly inflamed. I happen to be Catholic. It's not actually a new battle for me. My father had the same position. He was threatened with excommunication. I passed marriage equality, which they didn't support. So this is just one in a string of actions. But it's New York at its best, because we highlighted the problem and we solved it, and we're not going backwards on women's rights. That's not going to happen.
One final point. The census, Governor. We care deeply about the census, and everybody, no matter how boring it may seem, to fill out that form. It is a big deal for us. We stand to lose 2 seats. We stand to lose potentially a lot of money, and there is a massive effort that needs to go underway. I want to start by saying we were encouraged by the victory regarding the question in the courts, which was resounding, and I should thank people like Steve Choi from the New York Immigration Coalition, the governor's office, everyone for their work on that. I also want to say we were encouraged that the census was in the state of the state. We have a massive effort to run together, and Abney wants to do everything it can. So I want to say 2 things. One, the leaders of the governor's committee will be back to talk to us about the co-chairs, about things we can do. But I want to say to everybody, you have ways you can help this. Please work with us, whether it's technology, whether it's platform, whether it's your community, whether it's the people you work with. This matters deeply to our city and our state, and we can control it. If we can get people to fill out these forms and we can protect them, we can deliver for our state. So please, come to us. We've just hired Melvin Miller, the former Deputy Borough President of Queens, to run this effort for Abney. Please come to her. Please come to me. Thank you. And most important, Governor, thank you for everything today. We're grateful.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's program.